Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be talking to you about Lady Avalon. But first things first, I will be doing a summer event review, but I just wanted to mention that kind of as a PSA, summer's probably going to be coming a little bit early for us here on NA. You guys can see basically on JP, the event actually occurred at the earliest in early August. Whereas for us here on NA, it's probably going to be coming pretty much on the 17th or 18th, somewhere right in there. We may see them delay it some, but I doubt it. I would expect news of a live stream very shortly here, and then probably us actually getting it. Because while they did preview the first banner during anniversary, they didn't preview really anything else. So I do expect that they are going to actually get a little bit more in depth on it, and that's kind of what we're thinking in terms of timing for the actual event. But to kick things off, we're going to go ahead and start off basically here with our first banner, which, as you guys can see here, is Lady Avalon and Gareth Saber. I'm going to start out by talking to you guys about Lady Avalon herself, and we can't really talk about Lady Avalon without comparing her to her counterpart, which is going to end up being Merlin. Yeah, this comparison is going to be a pretty heavy-handed one. It's one in which, obviously, she's basically Proto Merlin, as you guys can see. She's also known as LA, Lady Avalon. She is a limited unit coming out here with the first banner on summer. And she's also the first time we've ever really had a brand new unit added to summer. That is to say, a unit that had never been in existence prior to summer. So she is one of the first times that ever happens, and it definitely was a monumental occasion because a lot of people were not expecting her in that way. People were maybe expecting her back during the arcade collab, or again, whenever it chose to come out. But at that point, she kind of just jumped the gun and got out early before any of that really happened. So at that point, it was a really cool thing to see. People were, crazily excited when they announced her, and there was obviously a lot of hype. And now we are 2 years into JP after her release, and we've had a little bit more time to think and process about her, and we can talk a lot about her actual performance. So, with that in mind, we are going to be going through Lady Avalon here and comparing her to Merlin as we go through the kits so that you guys can see just how similar she is. But I think just outright out of the gate, one of the big things I'm going to have to explain to you guys is going to be the fact that Lady Avalon is going to end up being just a very solid unit for you guys to acquire. Particularly if you don't have someone like, say, Tamamo or maybe Nero Bride, someone that maybe can handle a little bit of the healing side of things alongside a unit like Castoria. She can be used in place of a Castoria as long as you feel like you have enough sort of support to keep the party alive, but she's not a full replacement for Castoria given the sheer amount of invalidation and invulnerability that Castoria can provide the group when it comes to mitigating enemy damage. So in that regard, let's go ahead and jump right in and talk about her actual stats here. So to begin with, you guys can see she has only 11.5k attack. This is not, absurdly good, but it's also not the worst we've seen, particularly in the aspect of her being a support caster in that regard. Sorry, I say caster. She is a pretender, so that does afford some benefits and some disadvantages. In that regard, one of the things you want to think about is just the fact that she won't necessarily be vulnerable to the same things a caster would, but she also will have sort of that weird kind of pretender niche at play where she's going to be a little bit more effective against the knight classes, and you really won't want to be taking her against the cavalry classes at all. So in that regard, it is another interesting aspect to her to consider. She does have about 14k HP. This is not the best. In fact, I think a lot of people, especially for a support unit, would hope that she would have a little bit more. But for the majority of cases, I'm going to tell you that this will not be a huge concern with her because Proto Merlin absolutely has the capability to just kind of keep healing, and it's definitely one of the better aspects to her. She is, ironically enough, voiced by Saber, aka Ayako Kawasumi, who is basically going to be her voice and the voice of Saber, but you also have on the flip side Merlin, who is ending up being voiced as the same person that also voices Arthur. So we actually see sort of a basic like flip flop in that regard in terms of their roles. It's another little interesting factoid for her. And from here, you guys can see she is Earth attribute. She does have 102 star absorption, a little bit higher than the average for pretenders. She has star generation of 19.8, a little bit lower, but star generation is not going to be a huge concern with her, given the way her NP works. And she does have a 0.53 NP charge attack rate. This is also not going to be a huge concern because Proto Merlin's got a whole lot of stuff going for her, but it may be more of a concern than most people realize, and I'm going to talk about that down the stretch here. So you can see here her NP charge defense is also 3%. This is just the amount that she's going to get whenever she's hit. And basically the death rate here being 16.5, it's at least lower than average, so we should be able to use her at least semi-effectively against death units. You're never totally going to be immune unless you take someone that is actually death immune or have some sort of buff to cover it, but still, that is a fairly good rate to have on her. Her alignment is chaotic good, and she is female gendered. Her basic traits here are Hominidae Servant, Humanoid, Round Table Knight, Servant, Summer Mode Servant, and Weak to Inima Elish. So definitely some interesting ones there, particularly the Round Table Knight, which maybe most people might not think of, just given the fact that most people wouldn't necessarily associate her in that regard since she's not herself a knight. And then we end up talking about her deck. Now, she has the standard sort of support caster deck that we had seen for years and years and years, and that's a triple arts deck. So when you're wondering why her NP gain rate is kind of a concern, but kind of not a concern, the reason being here is just the fact that she has a 3-hit arts card, and not just one, but 3 of them. So this NP gain rate is still going to be quite good. She's still going to be very capable of charging her NP with her cards. The question is going to be more, do you want to use her cards, and maybe are you trying to use someone else? There'll be a lot of things to consider with regards to that, but it's definitely an interesting thing. Her other hit counts here with the singular quick card and singular buster card are above average at 4 hits. And then she has another average hit count here on the 5-hit extra attack. So still a fairly decent kit loadout, very good hit counts, and nothing to be concerned with in that regard. In fact, just for comparison over here to Merlin, Merlin has a much higher NP charge rate, but Merlin only has a 2-hit arts card, so he's definitely got that as a concern in comparison. But still, his card performance should be ever so slightly better, just depending on what you're trying to do with them. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the kit. As you can see here, Proto Merlin has her first active skill here being the Light Upon That Hand. This is going to end up being an arts performance that is targetable for one ally for 3 turns by 50%. It's also going to include the max HP gimmick that Merlin has for 3 turns of 3000% and increase her critical damage. Their critical damage by 100% for 1 turn. So this is essentially hero creation that Merlin has as his 3rd skill. And it is the exact same in every way, shape, and form. The only difference being that it is arts instead of buster. So again, it is straight up the exact same deal here, and everything at that point is pretty much moot for comparison point. The only big thing that we can say is because this is an arts buff, yes, Proto Merlin could in theory use this on herself to facilitate her getting back to her NP faster. Obviously, ideally, you don't want to do that. You probably want to put this on the damage carry, but it may just be something that you actually end up having to do. Either way, you can use this skill both to enhance damage and refund, and also as a heal. So that is one of the big things that I think a lot of people forget about, is the fact that in a pinch, using it just for its healing property can be really huge. The obvious benefit here as well that you're really going to want to pay attention to is going to be the critical damage, and the fact that it only lasts 1 turn. The good news is it is not aspected. That is to say, it is not only buster crit or only quick crit or something like that. It is all crit damage by 100%. And since we know we're probably going to be having quite a bit of stars in a Proto Merlin comp, that is definitely going to be a good thing for a damage dealer to be able to pop off. Keep in mind, it is only the first turn, unlike the 3-turn buffs for the other parts of it. All of that on a 6-turn cooldown. Now with the second skill here, we have the Blooming Flower of Summer Nights. This is going to increase the party's attack for 3 turns. Obviously, this is just going to be a fairly low modifier here at only 20%. Just the way to think about this is it's just a good charisma, and we're not expecting anything too cracked. But this is where Proto Merlin does start to get a little bit strong, as she does have the party charge of 20% here, so this is the exact same thing as Merlin. But then she's going to overcharge the party's NP by 1 stage, 1 time for 3 turns. This is strong. It is stronger than most people realize. Now, if we were to compare this to normal Merlin, as you guys can see, normal Merlin with his first skill has the exact same thing. It is his Dreamlight Charisma. It is on a 5-turn cooldown. Lady Avalon trades a turn of cooldown reduction to basically be able to add the overcharge effect. And I'm going to say this is a fairly good trade. Obviously, in the case of someone like Merlin, you're going to get this skill back faster. That means you're going to end up having it to be able to use quicker and potentially keep the party's charge going even faster and faster as you go along. So it is something to consider, but it is a really, really good aspect that he has that, at least from the standpoint of it just keeps the comp churning, it keeps him getting back to his NP faster, and I'm going to make a point with that later on. But for right now, the reason that this overcharge in and of itself is strong is the fact that it's going to enable, again, that sort of concept of the invincible comp, the invulnerable comp, the comp that is unkillable in effect. It's totally not unkillable in the wrong set of circumstances, but for the vast majority of challenge content, you guys can see that the invincible comp works a ton. And Lady Avalon is going to be a great asset to that comp. Merlin already had been a requirement for it pretty much. As you had seen, the combination of Merlin with Castoria had allowed for both healing, star generation, and charge per turn on top of just keeping the party protected and giving them a ton of charge. So that combination of factors had led to a very powerful, potent comp. Now with Lady Avalon, instead of pairing a Buster support with an Arts support, you now can pair 2 Arts supports together. That already just spells good things. But when we start to add in something like the overcharge effect here, this starts to enable the ability to use other units in this comp and have it still be very effective. If you guys are unfamiliar with the Invincible comp, I highly recommend you check out my video on it. But the TLDR about it is that it works with Castoria and Merlin, and usually you end up having a damage dealer that is either Morgan Le Fay or again, maybe someone like Himiko. There are other options, but the general premise on who that damage dealer is going to be somebody that provides overcharge to the party. This allows Castoria to get to at least 4 stacks when you place her NP third in a sequence of NPs, and it does allow for quite a bit of stacks of Solemn Defense. That Solemn Defense buff means that people are just not going to be able to damage the party very easily. There are ways through it, but again, it certainly depends, and I talk about all of those in that video. But the idea at play here is that you get that extra overcharge stack to get Castoria to those 4 stacks rather than just, 3 or something like that. Because as you start to have less and less stacks, it starts to become more likely that an enemy actually does break through. But when we start dealing with something like, again, 4 stacks or even 5 stacks, we start having that capability to really just mitigate a ton of damage. So getting that overcharge stack from the support instead of the damage dealer frees up the damage dealer to be really anyone you want. And you could obviously take, again, anyone you wanted in the old system, in the Buster-centric system. You just would have had that potential time where, yes, you might have been a little bit vulnerable early in the comp. You might have taken some damage and needed to heal it back. It may not have been enough to actually defeat you, but it would have been a vulnerability, a time in which the comp would have been able to be defeated, potentially. So adding in the overcharge definitely helps, and that's where, again, getting it on the support here is really nice. The problem with this is is that unlike someone like Morgan Le Fay, who gets it off of every NP that she does, you're only going to get this off of a skill on a 6-turn cooldown. The interesting part about the invincible comp is that it usually functions in cadences of 3 turns apiece. That is to say that you end up firing off everybody's NP every 3 turns, and that allows you to actually have that coverage for, again, the next 3 turns until Castoria's buff wears off. In the case of something like this, yeah, you're not going to have the overcharge effect for every one of those 3-turn cadences, but you might have it for the first one and then not for the second one. So this may be where you would maybe want to save a little bit of extra cooldowns just in case, or maybe keep someone, keep again that sort of invincibility cooldown from Proto Merlin or Merlin in reserve should you need to buy yourself time. So you're not going to have complete coverage with this. You can if your damage dealer also has a skill that has overcharge of 1 time 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Because then what you can do is you can stagger Proto Merlin and that damage dealer's overcharge rank and have complete coverage. Or you can just kind of have this a little bit more vulnerable, but not completely vulnerable, sort of swinging gate type of setup here, where one of the 2 cadences ends up having full protection. The other one has a little bit subpar protection, but it's enough that it keeps you surviving and keeps you going. So it's an interesting thing to analyze how much not only the cooldown can make a difference, but also just having this overcharge does make a huge difference for someone like Proto Merlin. It really frees up that invincible comp. It allows for a lot more options, and it is a huge boon to have this. Her third skill here ends up being Succubus Ridge EX. This one is going to end up basically granting the party invincibility for 1 turn. Now you'll notice if we go to Merlin's second skill, this is exactly that. He has Illusion A here. This is part of his Incubus kit here. He basically gets the party invincibility for 1 turn, critical star generation rate for 1 turn of up to 50% for the party, as well as reducing all enemies' critical attack chance for 3 turns by 20%, all on a 7-turn cooldown. Lady Avalon gets it a little bit different. So she's going to grant the party invincibility for 1 turn in the same way. She's going to then reduce all enemies' NP gauge by 1 every turn for 1 time. This is an unstackable effect. What does this mean? This means that it will reduce the enemy's NP gauge once on the next time they try to gain NP. It does not include the current turn. So if you, on your turn, apply this and the enemy is already at full charge, for instance, it is not going to drain them. Really, the way to think about this is it almost is going to function like a delayed block at that regard. That is going to allow it to sort of not prevent an NP from ever firing off, which is a good thing in this case, because since it happens on the same turn as the invincibility, you want the NP to go off. You would not want the invincibility to occur and then the NP to get delayed and then have your invincibility wasted. So yeah, you got to be careful of things like invuln pierce, but still, it's better to have the NP go off on the same turn. So that is the ideal, is going to be that you're going to pop this on the turn that an enemy has their NP. And then the next time they gain a NP charge, whenever that is, it will be blocked. So it is a really, really nice thing. Again, you guys can see that is exactly what it says right here. It's going to prevent the enemy's MP from being charged for 1 tick at the start of the next turn. Charges the own NP gauge based off the number of enemies. So this is another effect that Proto Merlin is going to benefit from. The number of enemies that she is facing is going to give her, just her, not the party, charge. So think of this very similar to the same effect as like Yang has on her second skill, where she has the ability to drain. This isn't necessarily draining the enemy, it's preventing their next charging opportunity, and then it's going to charge Proto Merlin on that current turn, basically per number of enemy. This is what actually gets leveled when you level the skill. So if you do manage to lure this skill, you're going to end up getting 20% charge per enemy that you face. Obviously, there's some crazy scenarios like a 5 or a 6 enemy wave where you would charge over 100% from this. But in a conventional setup, basically, At a single enemy, you're getting 20%. At 2 enemies, you're getting 40%. And at 3 enemies, you're getting 60% charge. Right there, out of the gate, Merlin does not have that. And that is a really, really interesting thing that he doesn't. This is why a lot of people have, just at face value, they look at Proto Merlin and they just instantaneously feel that she's better. Now, there may be some things that they may be missing about that, and I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, but it is an interesting thing to see that, yes, she does have just this sort of instant charge ability that really can help her out, depending on how many enemies you are actually facing. Now, you can see here that the NP turn charge minus, which is the actual buff, works similar to NP seal. However, it's not going to, again, prevent the NP outright. So the enemy's charge is not drained in the same turn it's used. Rather, the enemy's charge is prevented from gaining a tick for the next turn. Now, the interesting thing about this is you can see it says by 1 every turn for 1 time. This effect does not expire, but it is unstackable. So somehow, if the enemy hadn't managed to use it up, by the time you got this skill back, it wouldn't stack and you would waste it. But at that point, if the enemy hasn't managed in 8 turns to basically get the actual NP charge up even once, well, I'm going to say that they have some sort of defect or some sort of gimmick at play. So it's probably not a big deal anyways. But it is an interesting thing to see that this will not expire. It's just whenever they gain charge next. Again, you can see it can be used on an enemy even if they have 0 charge. So the only thing you really want to consider is kind of the fact that this is paired with your invincibility and when that may or may not be good to use. And then again, if NP charge turn minus is used when an enemy's NP is full, the enemy will use their NP, and the effect of this skill is applied the turn after, basically when they have no charge. So again, it's not going to be wasted in that sense. It's just going to sit there until the enemy would gain another charge stack. So please understand, this is still a very good effect. It works in a wonky way, but you'll see it's rather intuitive once you get used to it. It's just the way to think about it, like I said, is to think about it preventing the next source of charge from that unit. The next time they would gain a tick at the start of the next turn, it's going to prevent it. So it's really, really nice in that regard. There's one other aspect we got to talk about here, and that's this. This is on an 8-turn cooldown. So when we compare this to Merlin, Merlin has his party-wide invincibility on a 7-turn cooldown. A lot of people wish this was a 6-turn cooldown on Merlin. 6 turns would make it way more usable. It'd be way better. But sometimes you gotta tough it out and get it to that 7th turn in order to actually survive. Lady Avalon's gonna have to go a turn even further to get back to this, again, invincibility. The way I choose to think about this is while it is 1 turn longer, it is still somewhat similar to Merlin because this charge reduction is going to buy you 1 more turn. So it's not the exact same, but it is very similar, just maybe a little bit more problematic at times. Again, that's now her kit. So let's take a look at her passives, and this is where things are going to get even more crazy with Proto Merlin. So her first passive skill here is just going to be Territory Creation, just a flat 4% arts performance, and nothing too much to write home about, just a good one to have. She gets Item Construction A here that increases her own debuff success rate by 11%. Again, not too big of a deal, but hey, better to have it than not. Then things start to get interesting. She gets Mixed Blood EX. This is the exact same passive that Merlin gets. This is a charge every single turn of 5% per turn. This is just a natural, strong passive. No matter what you equip to Proto Merlin, no matter what is going on at the time, Proto Merlin will gain 5% charge per turn. And that is good. That just automatically sets Proto Merlin on the path to, hey, I'm going to get to my NP. But remember, this is the exact same thing that Merlin has. However, in the realm of things that Merlin doesn't have, the next one here is High Speed Divine Words Bewitching EX. This is just a flat out 20% charge, automatic, that Proto Merlin starts the battle with. This is literally a Lord mana loading. Hilariously,
it stacks with mana loading. So yes, with Proto Merlin and a Lord mana loading, you can start out the battle with 40% gauge despite not having equipped anything CE wise in order to increase that. So it is a very, very strong effect. And we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, the idea at play here is that if you're facing a 3 enemy wave with this third skill, if you remember, like I said, with the skill Lord, you get 20%. That means if you're facing 3 enemies, you're getting 60%. Well, if you have her Lord mana loading, that's 20%. And her passive just lets her start with another 20. So yeah, she can just turn 1 NP without having any starting charge otherwise. That's strong. That's very good. And that's going to help get the ball rolling. But again, remember, it's going to require a 3 enemy wave at minimum for something like that to occur, and you having worked on something like your mana loading. Then we get to Independent Manifestation A. This is a very interesting trait that I'm not going to talk very much about, but needless to say, it is an increase to her own critical damage by 10%, instant kill resistance by 10%, and mental debuff resistance by 10%. So certainly a good passive to have. Her appends here. I think that this one's pretty much a no-brainer. Yeah, you want to start out with the mana loading because of exactly that situation that I talked about earlier. This is just really going to be a huge thing for her to be able to start out the battle at 40% charge automatically. So at that point, this is just really, really solid for her. Now, her third append skill here is anti-saber attack damage aptitude. She is a pretender, so she does have at least that 1.5 times effectiveness against sabers, but she's a support unit, so while we can make the argument that maybe you would be taking her a lot for various reasons, trying to say that this is worth your coins is probably not a deal unless you are, again, somebody that is a really enthusiastic person who's going to roll a lot of Proto Merlin. So to me, the third one's actually her weakest because of that support sort of niche that she's in. And then the first skill here is the extra attack finesse improvement. This one's always solid, and on a support, well, it's not going to be as good as the mana loading for her. It could still definitely be good down the stretch in a challenge environment, as this is not only more damage for her extra attack, but it's also more star generation and more NP generation. So if you do end up having to use a Brave Chain with Proto Merlin, this is just going to help it work even better. Then we get to her Noble Phantasm, and we're going to have a lot to say about this. So with Proto Merlin in mind, please understand that she is fundamentally Merlin, but different. So as you look, you can see her arts-based Noble Phantasm is a sport one, and it's going to increase the party's max HP for 3 turns. Well, that's interesting, because the way Merlin works with his NP is Merlin recovers the party's HP every turn for 5 turns. Now, he recovers a base of 1,000. It does scale all the way up to 2,000 with NP5. So that's 1,000 healing every turn for 5 turns automatically. That's just strong. Lady Avalon is going to get a base of 3,000. So she gets a lot more up front. And this scales all the way up to 5,000 at NP5. So definitely solid. What's the kicker here, though? Well, for starters, it's max HP. So to a degree, this is just better than Merlin. Why do I say that? Because max HP is perfectly efficient healing. There is no way to be wasteful with it. It is literally an additional pool of HP. If you are sitting at, let's say, 9,000 out of 10,000 HP, and you give yourself 3,000 max HP, that just means you are now at 12,000 HP out of a new cap of 13,000. So you are never going to have any wasted healing. That's sort of one of the issues with Merlin, is that if you're already at the cap of healing, this 1,000 HP, because it's just HP regen, just goes into the void, and you never get that. Whereas with Lady Avalon, max HP up is definitely going to be a solid thing, because it's just going to keep increasing the maximum pool. It does eventually expire, but there's no downside to it, as any damage that you took that dealt damage to the max HP pool that you had will not carry over necessarily to your base health pool. You would have to have taken more damage than you actually had for the buff. So if you took 4,000 damage, then you would have been left with net minus 1,000 basically at the end. But it is still a very, very good, strong, and powerful effect to have. That is to say, again, max HP is always stronger than just straight up healing because it can't be wasted. Here's the downside, though. It is all up front. So that is maybe an issue if you're in a fight that maybe has some sort of weird scenario where you're not going to be able to MP as much, or you're maybe in situations where things are going to get stripped from you. It just is what it is. Those sorts of things are still going to affect Merlin, but the good part that Merlin does have is Merlin has this on a 5-turn duration. This is part of one of the reasons that whenever you are NPing with Merlin, that you manage to just keep NPing with Merlin, that his effects keep just lasting long and long. And so you're able to sit there and just keep multi-stacking his NP. It's partially due to the duration of this actual effect, but it's also due to the fact that Merlin has very good NP generation. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. So in that regard, it's not a bad thing that she has this, but it is something to consider that it is only a 3-turn duration as opposed to the 5-turn duration that Merlin has. That is maybe why she gets a little bit more out of the gate, but it is definitely still a little bit stronger in her case. So from here, her second effect is going to charge the party's NP gauge every turn for 3 turns. Well, Merlin has this as well. Merlin has it for 5 turns, though. So Merlin gets more out of that per se. That is to say, Merlin straight up gets 25% party charge out of 1 NP. Definitely takes time to roll out, but it is what it is. Now, the interesting part about this is it's not a factor of Merlin's NP. It's just a base amount, and it never scales. In Proto Merlin's case, looks like the devs got a little bit power creepy as they decided that it was going to be a factor of her NP level, and so it actually does increase over time. So at base NP1, she's only going to get 15% charge out of 1 NP, but pretty much by the end, you're getting 10%, so you're now actually getting 30. So in a weird way, the more NP levels of Proto Merlin you get, the more worth she has. She's straight up going to become a better and better support for you because of not only the max HP scaling up, but also the NP gen going up as well. This does pretty much put her on par with something like a Prisma Cosmos, and that's pretty nuts when you consider that she herself is still going to be getting that 5% per turn from Mixed Blood. This is also why, again, whenever you're using someone like, say, Merlin, he is also somebody that just really gets to his NP rather easily, and you usually don't have to do too much in order to help facilitate that. Partially because, again, he is a arts-based NP and does have a triple arts deck, so forming arts chains with him is usually not that hard, but also given the fact that he, again, does have that Mixed Blood passive, and that does allow him to just kind of help facilitate getting to that NP faster. In Proto Merlin's case, we had the same deal. She's just going to get it even more. And so in that regard, you can almost view it as a benefit because at higher NP levels, Proto Merlin will be getting more charge by 5% in only 3 turns compared to Merlin's 5. So in that regard, it will happen quicker and be a little bit more compact and contained. So you're going to get the reward faster in Proto Merlin's case. That may be good, that may be bad. It just might depend on the fight that you're in. But in most cases, I'm going to say getting something faster is probably good, unless somehow it could be wasteful to you to do so. Her overcharge effect here gains her critical stars every turn for 5 turns. This is the exact same as Merlin's. So, same deal here with him. He pretty much gets the same thing for 5 turns. Again, from 5 to 25. Lady Avalon gets it, and ironically enough, they kept this at a 5-turn duration. Every other aspect of her NP is locked to 3 turns, but this is the one way in which they kept it the exact same as Merlin's, and I find that kind of ironic, because this may have been one way to temper it a little bit. Now, let's consider that. What then is the difference between a Merlin and a Proto Merlin? I think this is something that needs to be discussed. Well, for starters, just on the outset, we can straight up say that Merlin is going to be the more buster-centric unit due to his hero creation. Lady Avalon, on the flip side, is going to end up being the more art-centric unit due to her first skill. Proto Merlin is going to basically have an easier time carding to his NP than Proto Merlin will. But Proto Merlin is going to have an easier time automating it due to her scaling with her NP and due to the amount of sort of easy charge she gets from her passive, as well as her third skill here, granting charge per enemy. So Proto Merlin is going to very quickly be able to get to an NP, secure that NP, and be able to very easily start the whole chain rolling. Merlin's going to maybe require a little bit more setup, but once Merlin keeps going, Merlin's actually going to be a little bit more consistent. What do I mean by that? That may be an interesting question that some of you might have. Well, the only downside to someone like Proto Merlin is, again, that 3-turn duration. Proto Merlin, in order to keep the buffs going, is going to have to keep NPing faster. She gets the rewards faster, but the rewards also expire faster. So it's still really good for her, but this does mean that you're going to need to keep weaving that NP in even more in a challenge environment. Whereas Merlin is very much, due to that 5-turn duration, a little bit more set it and forget it and let it just kind of roll. So it's not a bad thing that Proto Merlin has this necessarily. It just means that she's going to require a little bit more active participation. And at times where her third skill is on cooldown, you really are going to probably have to rely on carding with her in order to get her to the NP. You're going to really want to form those triple arch chains and actually do work that in. Whereas, again, just depending on what's going on, you may be able to rely, in Merlin's case, on just the automated factor of it. But it really does depend on what you're trying to do. Obviously, this is just looking at it from a Merlin's perspective. From the damage dealer's perspective, we can certainly say that the damage dealer is getting more charge and everything kind of just faster. They're getting the benefits of the healing as well, so that is a thing. So it's not necessarily going to be the biggest of issues, because Proto Merlin stuff is on a shorter sort of time duration. It does expire faster, but that also means that you're kind of going to need to get it up faster as well, which means that if something does actually interrupt or remove the effect of the NP, you're kind of already in that mentality of, I got to get Proto Merlin back right away. Whereas when that happens with Merlin, you might have gone, oh crap, I just put his NP up and I'm not ready to get the NP back right away. So there is that consideration. So again, I do think both are very usable. I do think both are very good. I'm going to say in Buster scenarios, you're still just going to be using Merlin. And in art scenarios, yeah, now you will have a Proto Merlin. So let's consider then Proto Merlin's prospects with regards to, do you need her? Do you have to have Proto Merlin? And if you do, what MP level do you need her at? So let's deal with the first question there. Do you need Proto Merlin? Proto Merlin is a very good unit. She will absolutely be a fantastic tool to have in your Chaldea. She will work very well in the invincible comp. But if you already have units like Tamamo, or like original Merlin even, the need is not as great. She still brings a lot to the table, and she can still be very good, but she doesn't necessarily have that sort of requirement tag on her. So for newer players, I think she's a very solid pickup, particularly if they don't have Merlin. But for more veteran players, you may want to consider whether or not you actually do need her, given the fact of when she'll kind of be showing up. We already know basically at this point that she's going to be part of this, very, very, lucrative summer, basically sought after by a lot of people. But she is going to have a banner here, and then again during the arcade collab. So you will have another opportunity to roll her. However, that might not be any better. you may be looking at it from that perspective thinking, oh yeah, I can punt, I can delay her, I don't have to get her right now. But if you're after Tiamat and Draco, that's not any better because that's right exactly when she's going to be reappearing. You're going to have to pick and choose how you feel about her and whether or not you think she is a requirement and necessary to roll. But I do think that's something to consider, is the timing of the banner and where it is most beneficial to you should you desire her. Now, do you have to have her at a higher NP level? The answer to this is no. I'm just going to straight up tell you that Lady Avalon works at NP1. The only issue that you might have is you might find her without sort of the extra scaling of NP levels that you do sort of, if we're talking about maybe a 3-turn cadence again, that on one cadence you have it very easy getting to an NP. On the next cadence, it might be a lot harder. You might not be able to be as consistent getting her to an NP because so much of her itemization is kind of tied up in this charge per enemy on an 8-turn cooldown. There's still a lot there, but this is where, again, trying to factor in a lot of that is going to be a factor of how much do you want to be using her cards and how much NP levels did you get of her. The more NP levels you have, the more charge per turn you're getting from the NP, and the faster it's rolling out and getting her back to another one. So yeah, a Proto Merlin at high NP levels naturally just functions better than a Proto Merlin at low NP levels. But you can still use her at NP1. No, you do not have to have her. You just need to be cognizant of what to do if you basically find yourself in that situation. So to me, one of the things that I would straight up tell you that is going to be a very useful tool to have is the Prisma Cosmos C. For those of you guys that maybe have not chosen your Craft Essence pick for Anniversary yet, this is a very good CE, and it is on that Craft Essence selector. Obviously, there are, very lucrative and good Cs on there like K-Scope and Black Grail. Those are going to be probably chief and foremost in most people's considerations. But Prisma Cosmos is a fantastic CE for challenge content and is a great Craft Essence to put on Merlin, Castoria, Tamamo, you name it. So naturally, it's going to be a great one to put on Lady Avalon as well. This is just going to help automate more of her charge per turn. This is going to make it so that you don't have to use her cards to get her to that NP nearly as often, which might allow you to use the damage dealer's cards instead, allowing you to get through the node faster, allowing you to beat the fight faster, making it a lot easier on you. So it is something to be considered. Now, you can use Lady Avalon for something like farming purposes. At base value, she has a 50% arts up for 3 turns and 20% party charge with an overcharge effect. So that can be used to good effect. But for the majority of things, she's going to be a, hey, this is who I put in if the fight falls apart, rather than, hey, I'm going to be using you for farming purposes. If you do use her for farming purposes, you're going to be wanting to look for an arts unit that has very good refund and can handle the majority of what they're trying to do without the brute force charge provided by, say, another Castoria or an Oberon or something like that. Proto Merlin can be used, and for NP gain based units, actually quite good. So that's definitely something that can be good, especially if you consider that a lot of your farming nodes, you might be facing 3 enemy waves. And that might mean that you might be able to charge her NP up to full and get it off before a damage dealer's NP, then granting the damage dealer that additional charge per turn effect. So there is that to consider as well. But admittedly, this will slow down any farming comp that you try to use it in, so it's just something to be cognizant of, but maybe not something that you'll use all the time. So yes, she can be used in a farming comp, but primarily with NP gain based units is where she will be the strongest. So in that regard, again, she's still a very good pickup. She's a absolutely phenomenal addition to your roster in terms of challenge content. And even if you have other units like Merlin and Tamamo, she still has her own niche to be used in that is quite good. She might not be as standoutish. She might have a lot of overlap with other units, but she is still someone that I think every single one of you should consider. And she has definitely been a good addition to my roster on JP over the years. I have certainly not regretted rolling her and have been a very lucky person to have her in that regard. So again, I'm going to say she is good enough that you all should consider, but she is not a requirement for you all to have, and certainly there is the issue of the scalability of the NP with Proto Merlin. So let me know what you guys think about Proto Merlin and whether or not you'll be rolling for her banner. Also, which Ascension is your favorite, and I hope you guys had a good time at the anniversary and got lucky with everything that you were trying to roll for. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys for the next summer video. Have a good one.